Welcome to another episode of the Apwazi Wine Buzz. As you know, we always like to interview the most interesting of characters, individuals that make a difference, are making a difference, and someone who's going to give you that special edge. And today's guest is particularly interesting because he encompasses all of those characteristics that I've mentioned, and his name is Carlton McCoy Jr. Now, welcome to the show, Carlton.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, having this discussion with you. And I've listened to your previous episodes, and I have to say, I hope you haven't set the bar too high, because compared to people you've interviewed,
Well, I think you're very kind and gracious there, Carlton. Now, there's monikers and titles that we all have amassed over time. And putting those aside, imagine that we together are sitting over dinner together with 4 other people that have not met you, and they're meeting you for the first time.
Sure.
One of them asks you, "So tell me, who is Carlton McCoy?" looking you deeply in the eye. How would you answer that?
I guess not to be too philosophical. It's a difficult question to answer. I would have to respond to the question with the question of is do you mean what I do for a living, what my day-to-day job is, or because there's many ways I think people can define themselves. But I'd say if that is the question they're asking, my my title and my work is as CEO and managing partner of Lawrence Wine Estates. I'm the master sommelier here, overseeing the enterprise here.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would accept that if I was the person asking, but I want to know a little bit more about you. You have this interesting look about you. You have those deep, inquiring eyes that reflect a remarkable intelligence. I want to know more about the inner you. Tell me about that.
That's also a bit complicated. I'll answer that with I occasionally get asked to come and speak at things, and I'm not terribly too fond in giving speeches, because I think it comes with an assumption, one, that someone cares what you have to say, but two is you're often telling them what you want them to know. Where what I would say is, well, what do you want to know? And then that thrives a conversation. But for me, um, I'm a person who lives my entire life being directed by passion, and that's for people, and passion for culture, um, and everything I do in my life, whether it be personal or professional, which I've had very little separation between the two throughout my life. Is driven in an endeavor to chase those things, cultural aspects, spending time with really interesting, beautiful people. It's sort of and everything collides because of that venture. And again, it draws very little separation between personal and professional, because my profession is really rooted in my personal endeavor.
So, well, I can see that you're like a complex wine, simple to drink at the beginning, but as you allow it to percolate and you let it breathe, you get different facets, and it's clear that that's what you are, Carlton. You're many things to many people, and you're traversing many disciplines and converging on all, from culinary to wine, and host of the CNN Nomad travel program. Tell us, which one came first and which one now dominates your time?
Well, I was raised in a household of people who work very, very hard, and were also driven by passion for certain things. In the case of my grandmother, it was
Mhm.
religion, food, and so food is in the culture of food, which ultimately, if you really dig into it, it encompasses the history of the world and almost all
Of
humanity,
course.
the history of what we eat and how we eat. tells a story. So it's really driven a lot of the direction of everything I've done, whether that be my current work, my venture to become a master sommelier, my early venture as a chef, and even Nomad in what we were doing there, and that was very much a personal endeavor, more so than professional. Is all driven by that. And I think what I we have to remember that every day we're sort of creating the script of our lives, and my goal is that my life has to encompass all those things for it to be what I want out of it. And it's and also to be an example, right? Is
Of course. I mean, every single day that we have, we sort of putting another thread
yeah, yeah,
to
it's
our
another line.
tapestry of life.
Yeah,
So,
it's another line. And to me, it's an interesting way to live, but it also by nature of a decision to live that way, you will naturally find yourself involved in all these crazy aspects of what's going on in the world. And I think
yeah.
that where our industry is right now, I think that's sort of the next phase of the wine industry is, I think, reclaiming its seat in the table of a cultural element, and not just sitting out here in this world no man's land by itself. And it's almost what the consumer is desiring as well, and it's perfect time to start, I guess, sort of re-bringing it back into the fold of that conversation.
Well, I think we're both on the same side of the sort of Jedi Knights because we're bringing in culture, and while you're bringing it in the sense of the food and the wine, as I am, I'm also bringing in etiquette and manners.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, I noticed that in some of your episodes of the CNN, you went to Ghana, there's Paris, there was Korea, there was Mississippi.
Yeah.
Um, these why those particular areas? Why were they selected?
And when we decided on the destinations, there were a couple criteria. One was that we wanted to make sure that we were going to different continents.
Hmm.
We want to be so just anchored in Europe or anchored in Asia. We want to just sort of pop around to different continents and to be able to give a snapshot of what was happening in the world through culture. And obviously to endeavor to do that with 6 episodes is pretty much impossible. But if we could sort of spread the love a little bit, we can give people a much more worldly perspective outside of what was happening here. And where we wanted to go was places where we felt that there was this growth and this quick evolution culturally and politically and socially that was happening there, where it was a hotbed for it, where we could go and sort of document those exciting times. Because we look at countries and they go through these sort of ebbs and flows of cultural evolution, and it can be driven by a number of things. But you just get a feeling where it's okay, it's time to be there and see what's happening there. We talk about different artist movements and culinary movements around the world.
Mm.
For so many reasons, and often they're very unique reasons. In a certain place in time, there's an energy, right? We talk about the 30s and 40s and 50s and the art scene in Paris and what was happening there. And then you look at Spain with the culinary movement, kicked off by Fran Adrian, that sort of movement, what was
Yes.
happening there. And there's all these energies that are going on. Ghana for me was and is this sort of come out of nowhere cultural explosion of music and art, and people are now just discovering the cuisine of these West African nations. But it also exists as a counter perspective into the normal narrative of what we think about as African nations, which tend to be violent and crime ridden. And Ghana was probably one of the safest places I've ever felt traveling. Some of the kindest, most peaceful people. And I had not really explored West Africa thoroughly, and it was a wake up call for me. But you're also going to a country that where you can find some similarities, but there's so much that is new. When we talk about things like etiquette, is their perspective on that is very different because the
Yes.
way they interact with each other in the world is different. So you come to the table with what we've all learned is etiquette in the West, and that just goes out the window, and you're sort of learning new ways to move and to eat, and that was very, very exciting. So
Exactly. Who
but
eats
it's
first?
normalized, and we wanted to show like, okay, well, there is more than one filter on the world, and we wanted to show that, and we try to do that everywhere we go. It's these In terms of places that you think you know, like Paris, but we show this whole other side of Paris that is like this exciting, bubbling, creative energy on the outskirts of Paris, and what that looks like as the city center starts to spread out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And certainly the influences where the French colonized other
of
countries.
course. Yep.
I think there was the prawn and the sugarcane dish, which
Hmm.
looked rather tempting.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, I think we certainly are attacking the aspect of cultural diversity with from a different perspective, but in the same goal.
Yeah.
Now, having had that experience of traversing the world through the lens that you did, what do you see as some of the highlights and trends developments in the world of wine right now that excites you the most?
I think what's most exciting is one that more people in the world are starting to drink wine. Countries and cultures that where wine was not present on the table, it's becoming a part of the conversation everywhere, in different degrees. And
Yes.
you're also starting to see regions that previously were not taken very seriously, enhancing quality and becoming real competitors for, the big classical regions that always held the throne. For me, that's very exciting. You look at now with the business we're doing in Bordeaux,
Mhm.
and which gives you even more global perspective on what's happening in the world, is you now have, the Place de Bordeaux importing wines from Chile and South Africa and Argentina and the US. They also recognize that, Bordeaux is an incredibly important region and probably always will be. But there's other people who have a voice, and there's a demand for that voice. That to me is really exciting. We're starting to connect at a much more rapid pace as a wine industry and as a global wine industry. And that to me is only
How about generational influences?
you know what is interesting is you're starting to see it's different in every country. Like we study that, and we're seeing actually in some places in Europe the consumption of wine sort of start to diminish. But in the US, you start seeing, I think maybe because of the sort of entrepreneurial spirit of the US, of just sort of taking things and tossing them around and trying new things, that we've, I think, probably adapted what we're doing to bring in new consumers probably a little bit more aggressively through canned and high-end bag in the box and spritzers, and I'd say much more interesting, less tradition-based labeling, and even the way we sell wine digitally and so forth, that we're
Of
starting to
course.
bring in another demographic that probably earlier on than when their parents started drinking wine more seriously.
So you
Um,
see the trend, one of the major wine trends, Carlton, is going to be the method of sale, the style that's going through, and you see generational influences.
and I think what's important is for us to recognize how people are introduced into wine, right? And look at, are
Mhm.
we giving them enough paths in? And I think this is a lesson that we are learning. So the things that things like canned wine and spirits are not new. They in the 70s they were doing this, and they
Mm.
sort of went out of fashion, and then they came back. It's my little conspiracy theory is that the industry recognized that we were taking ourselves too seriously, and that we used to have a pipeline for people to enter into wine that was, I'd say, less fussy and less precious, and that would be their segue in, and then we'd hook them, and we'd get them, studying and tasting wines maybe with a touch less sweetness, more structure, more minerality, and then we would help them climb that ladder. And we had lost a
Okay.
lot of that, and now we're coming back to creating that pipeline in for the 20 somethings to be introduced, because we were losing that ground.
That's very interesting. Interesting to note. And I'm going to get back to the CNN Nomad program in a second. But, I mentioned earlier on that you're a man of many different facets. So you like that classical wine, you sort of open it up and it's got that age on it. And with a good classical wine, you and I both know, let it breathe a little bit more. And, you'll see many different sides. And that's what's happened to you. You mentioned that you had only started traveling at a rather late age,
Yeah.
and that's taken you to many places. And also you now have many disciplines. You know, there's culinary, there's wine, there's travel, and there's a business that you're running. I mean, let's be very frank and brutal about it. You know, you are in the gladiatorial arena of the cut, thrust, and parry, competing with other wineries. So which one now captivates you the most? Not in terms of the bank statement, but in terms of the heart.
Yeah, when I was working as a sommelier, the work is really, while there's an overall obviously big picture philosophy of what you want to do in your program, it really is a day-to-day venture,
Mhm.
and the decision you're making in real time define your business and trajectory often. And I'd say the move to overseeing what was one winery and now many, is you start to see the work that you do through the lens of a multi-generational legacy of what you could leave behind, and that puts a different level of pressure on the work, a different level of intensity and commitment, mental and emotional, to the work. And I think right now I'm at that place where we're really, we have our head wrapped around sort of what we want our focus to be and what our legacy to be. Because myself and
What legacy do you want to leave?
for us, it's through the lens of our wines and our estates. Is we, Galen and I talk about it very openly, of because you have to, of okay, my grandfather used to say, if the Lord is willing and the creek doesn't rise, I'll live for this many years. And you go, well, if nothing tragic happens, this is how many ventures I have. And
Okay.
when you look at that, it's a very short amount of time, actually. And you go, well, if that's what we have, we've got this many vintages, then why not just do things the way we feel they should be done, producing the wines that we're excited to drink and to share with our friends. And then it's our job to make that an actual successful business. But we can't sacrifice the work. When we came to Napa, it was out of sort of a shared passion
Mhm.
for the old heritage style of winemaking in Napa. Hence the acquisition of Heights as our first venture into the Napa Valley. And that passion, that drive for that style, that structure of wine, that aromatic, that flavor profile, that still drives us, is what gives us guidance every day through all of our estates. Drove us to acquire Stony Hill and Burgess, and even with the development of new estates, they're made in that same structure. And we recognize that that often goes counter to the expectation for modern Napa, a bigger, sweeter, more robust wine. Um, but we also
But you
think,
are a trailblazer, so that doesn't really come as as a huge
sure.
surprise.
But it
Um,
wasn't. We were. It's not different for different sake. It was sort of like, this is what we're excited about. We're both excited about it, and if we're both on board, then we can do it together and we can be successful. Because we also are not in the business of trying to create controversy, because I think it's controversy is something that I think only gets in the way of the work, frankly. For us, we actually think there's room at the table for everyone, in that instead of trying to come in and say, well, we're doing this, so everyone should be doing this. This is actually probably it's what got us in the situation we're in Napa now, which is, okay, well, one to two people says this is what you should be doing, everyone has to follow suit. For us, what we're saying is that the region becomes much more interesting when there's all these voices saying different things, that through that you would see a general high quality but different styles, just like they've sort of evolved into in Barolo with the modern
mhm.
and traditional. Is
Modern, the old,
one isn't better than the other, it's a preference, but they're
sure.
both very high quality, and they both challenge each other, which is a really good thing. The modern producers really had to tighten up their game, and the traditional producers had to make sure, okay, are our cellars still clean, are the wines proper, and
So, do,
for us, it's like, if we could sit together with the modern Napa producers as just two voices in Napa.
so
uh,
Carlton, did you feel at any one time perhaps you were a little bit like the yeast put into the mousse when you started this venture in Napa? As you just mentioned, there's a few major influences, and then here you are trying this new style.
Which, well, what's interesting is, it was almost like we had this little internal saying, which is that our future is rooted in our past. And what we meant by that was that it's a often an evolution to sort of come back to your past. And we were really fortunate with the acquisition of three really prominent old estates, some of which had, seen better days, frankly. But
Sure.
we inherited a lot of knowledge, written knowledge of how the wines were made, how the vineyards were farmed. And what we did was we took that with now the new technology that we have
Oh,
and the new knowledge we have to go, great, well, how do we get sort of there, but maybe through a different, more efficient path? And we
quick
have
question. How did that knowledge come? Was it in the form of notes from previous
Yeah, yeah.
winemakers?
Each winery has not only do we have notes from them, we have weather and rain records, we have farming
That
records,
is
everything.
remarkable.
Yeah, and so we came right out of the gate again, maybe ignorantly and a little naive, going, "This is what we're really excited about. We're now gonna build this enterprise based around this style of wine. That's what we're doing." And I think there was initial, yeah, okay, good luck with that, kid, sort of mentality,
Okay.
and maybe some giggles from the peanut gallery.
Sure.
And we stayed the course, and we kept pushing. And now it's interesting is now you see with the release of new vintages, you have estates like Harlan and so forth going. We're now going back to a lighter style of. We're like, okay, great. So maybe it wasn't such a bad idea.
Well,
You
I
know,
think when I visit
yeah,
Napa, I'll give you a call, Carlton, and I'll
yeah.
come by and
But
visit the wineries.
But there's power in numbers. I always felt that with just heights, we were at a disadvantage because we were just one estate.
Sure.
It's a prominent estate, but just one estate. Now we have 5, 6 estates that are making wines in a very traditional, more elegant, nuanced manner. There's power in numbers. So when guests come, they can visit all 5 of our estates, and they sort of they're encapsulated in this structure of wine, and
Right.
that sends a much bigger message.
Well, that was my next question to you. This sort of requires juggling of time on a gargantuan scale, not only from a wine making perspective, but a wine product perspective. What makes your collection of wines under your influence remarkably different from others? And you've touched on that, briefly, that you look back on what history had and seems to resonate with you.
Yeah,
The past is, the future is the past.
yeah.
And that's what you did.
So,
So
so
let go ahead.
when we looked at when we had heights, we had one estate, and this is what we're doing. When we started to acquire new estates and then newer historical vineyards that had been known in the Napa Valley for decades, but no one knew their names really, and we built estates around them, it became a little more complicated. Our biggest concern was that we would essentially create like one house style for everything. And
Okay.
so in really fast order, we restructured and decentralized our entire enterprise, which is very expensive to do. And it's probably one of the most inefficient ways to run a wine enterprise. When people have a wine enterprise, the first thing they do is they look for efficiencies and they consolidate everything. What you see is ultimately the wines start all tasting the same. And then why have different estates? So what we did was we completely separated each estate. Each estate has its own estate director and its own winemaking team that in their own vineyard sources. So we're not just throwing a bunch of grapes into a bunch of fermenters and sharing. No, everyone has their own estates, most of which are single vineyard estates. So Ink Grade comes from one ranch on High Mountain. Stony Hill comes from
Okay.
exclusively the Stony Hill Ranch. Haynes just
Hmm.
Haynes. So we would ensure that they all had their own identity, they all had their own voice. They were telling a different story through not only the soil and the place, but the human terroir, which is often not discussed enough. Is as impactful as the place. Is how we express it. That's our impact, right? And but all within a range. I work with every team as we define the style, what we're bottling, what we're doing, what we're making, everything from farming all the way through blending, and what are we trying to tell there? But they all are within a range of structure. My team makes fun of me is I always say like we a wine a wine should not ever be defined obviously just by any structural element. But I'm very sensitive to alcohol, and I don't particularly enjoy drinking wines over 14% alcohol. There are occasions where I feel like people have integrated it very, very well. But once you get over 14, I get very sensitive to it, and it's the one thing
Okay.
about the
Well,
wines.
let me just stop
Yeah,
you at that point there,
yeah.
Carlton, because you mentioned something I think is really, really pertinent. Um, Pertinent in the sense that you've mentioned something that is quite subjective to you, the alcohol,
Mhm.
that you don't really enjoy high alcohol wines above 14%. Now, wine tasting can be a very subjective experience.
Oh, it completely is
Right.
subjective always.
How do you navigate the intricacies of personal taste while recommending wines to others, bearing in mind that your late um, grandmother gave you a lot of recipes, so
Mhm.
your palate is very different. It'll
Sure.
be very different to, let's say, a generation, the new generation, the younger generation of young Indians, young Chinese. Their palates are very different, or Argentina, or even Ghana.
Mhm.
How, and the question is that I'm often asked, and I'd like to hear how you would tackle this, is they say, oh, the Cabernet Sauvignons, the Shiraz, these are big, these are bad, they're bold,
Mhm.
and they go very well with a lamb or a steak. But most Indians don't eat big chunks of beef at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So, how do you look at that, while recommending um, the wines, given that most sommeliers and even most wine professionals may not have such a vast array of different culinary experiences?
Yeah, so I'll say first is, and that's why I think I sort of I added a note of you can't define a wine's quality or even your preference on it by one structural element, and I say that because what we ultimately look for in the wine is balance. So
Sure.
we're in Napa, where obviously there are lots that go above 14% alcohol, and I think for me is we also aren't going to just pick earlier just to pick earlier. Is we have to have a wine where everything is in balance. So if the alcohol is 14.2, 14.3, or whatever it is, but you as you taste the wine, it's in balance and it's fine. So we always have our the analysis of the wine when we're tasting, but we don't look at it until afterwards because I want to judge the wines and the lots for what they are. And then I go, okay, this one seems a bit disjointed with alcohol. So then I'll look at it, okay, great. Yeah, it's a little bit high. But if it's in balance, then it's not an issue, right? So for us, it's about how are we trying to express this place? And that has to be in balance. As far as the sort of cultural and that sort of international, even I think descriptors and tasting notes, I find that to be, I've always found that to be, I wouldn't say useless, but I would say it only applies to certain demographics, right? I recognize that in culinary school when I took my first wine class.
Mm-hmm.
These were some of the first times I'd ever had wine in my life, and the wine instructor was a fantastic man, and he was always very helpful for me and a great mentor. He was describing the wines what were traditional European descriptors, and a lot of these foods at this point in my career I'd never even had before. So the wine descriptions and what he was using to define them, and even more so the pairings were completely useless to me. Um,
Exactly.
so
Perfectly
it
useless.
becomes,
You're right.
yeah, it's a very difficult thing for us. I don't like tasting notes per se, because I always said is we're producing wines down on the Haynes Vineyard, and um, these wines are incredibly nuanced and very singular. They come from Winty Close Chardonnay planted in 1967, the original plantings on volcanic soils, and they're stunning wines. But when the team wants to create tasting notes for them, I say it's great. I says, well, do me a favor first. I want you to go out on the internet and I want you to print out wine critics tasting notes for the last 3 years for DRC Le Marochet, Le Fleuve Bienvenue Bitard Marochet, and then
Mm-hmm.
I want Rombeyer Chardonnay, I want Aubert Chardonnay, and Kistler, and then put them side by side. The tasting notes were pretty much the same. So what are we actually saying? Is that a useful piece of knowledge, or is there another way? I don't have the answer for it yet, but it's something that we're looking at ourselves as how do we describe these wines so that in a crowd of noise, people recognize what's special about the wines, but also you're not speaking a foreign language, but by saying one, tasting notes people don't understand, and your food pairings, which often come with these wine descriptors, are foods that aren't even found in the country. It's like this wine is fantastic with pasta. You're like, that's going to be very useful in India. Like,
Exactly. Exactly.
so it's a difficult thing, but it goes back to your first question, which is how are we adjusting to the wine world being much more global? Is we have to sometimes actually, instead of trying to add stuff, it's just actually remove some things and go maybe allow that person to have their own singular experience with the wine. We need to guarantee a quality. And I think we should be telling more stories of the people and the place and the intention, and not trying to describe the wines for people, because let them have their own experience. I think it's one of the most beautiful things about wine is that singular experience that we've been taught that we must put into words to express to other people, but it's maybe it's not important for anyone but the person drinking the wine.
Your springboard to your career began with culinary, Carlton.
Yeah.
And for me, we both have very influential grandmothers, late grandmothers. And would you think if someone was in the world of wine beginning their career, like you did, in the restaurants, and would you think it's sound advice that you would say to them, go and eat as many different foods that you can from different cultures, rather than just focusing on one? And why would you if you did?
I mean, absolutely. One, I mean, there's just what you would gain as a human. I think
Yeah, it's
is
true.
that to me is just tasting, smelling the foods of another place is it only helps you to understand the people more, and it is the easiest way to enter the door in someone's culture is through their food, because everybody eats. You can try with music, you can try with these other cultural elements. There is no better door to enter into someone's culture and try to understand them through their food. So you got that, but I think what you're alluding to is, I'll go back to the first time I ever blind tasted a wine. I was a food runner working for Eric Ziebald, who was the chef de cuisine of the French Laundry for many years. And I was 6 months in, and I got invited to this late night blind tasting group for a number of sommeliers there who were training to be master sommeliers. And I didn't even know what blind tasting was. So the wine director at the time pulled me off to the side and sort of guided me and says, "Look, I don't. As an exercise, I'm not going to tell you anything about the wine. I want you to just write what you smell and what you taste." And that entire experience, my ability to even just sort of harness that and think that way was fueled by my experience with food. And
Mhm.
through that exploration, I was fortunate enough to go to culinary school, so I was exposed to an enormous amount in a very short amount of time, which is probably the greatest value of culinary school. So I was able to go through and describe these things, and I remember him sort of laughing, like, "Yeah, I mean, that's a really fantastic description." And we had that conversation about culinary experience being probably the greatest as far as the enjoyment of wine, because what it does is it gives you a bit of a cheat code to the aromatics and the flavors of what you're
Of
smelling and
course.
tasting. It's to me it's incredible. But then also with pairing as well, the palette you're painting with when discussing pairings is much greater, right? Than
Of
just
course.
what's in your little bubble of influence.
Yeah. I mean, we have a common bonding of wine and also the passion and the food. And I've been very fortunate, that I've traveled to many, many countries, at least 100 countries, and I've
Wow,
eaten food from Djibouti to Somalia to Ethiopia, all the way down to the
that's great.
pampas of Argentina.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting when people talk to me about that. But in many ways, I count myself very fortunate to have done and lived the life that I have so far. Now, Carlton, clearly you are a beacon of success. What responsibility do you personally feel comes with that success? And how do you cope with it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll say I think for people who are driven uh, in a mission-based manner. I don't know if there is a destination where you go, okay, I'm successful. I've never seen it that way, and I think there are pros and cons to that. The moment there's an achievement, I'm moving like this, and I don't look back, and I really celebrate those things, which is something I'm working on. But I think the responsibility of it is, there's a laundry list of things that I think that if you're a thinking person and not just selfish, you say there is a responsibility to that. One is, I think, to create an environment for others who are equally ambitious to thrive, to mentor. I think we often get we confuse the definition of mentorship and what it is. When I talk about my mentors, sometimes it's 3-minute conversations, and sometimes it's someone I've met and they've taught me something. I just watched their career from afar, and it's quick conversations, and it gives me guidance. And because really successful people are busy, and they don't have time to sit and have 3-hour conversations unless it's like over dinner, right? So that responsibility to mentor and to give guidance to people who are ambitious and just need a little bit of clarity on which way to go. I think it's sort of like paying it forward. For me, as a mixed race kid who was raised in a very impoverished part of the U.S., I think there's also I've always had it in me, this sort of responsibility to say, well, how do you reach back and contribute to your community that put you where you are? Because before there was a culinary school or a quarter master sommeliers and all these things, there was a community that really served me and taught me a lot of the values that I have. And I think there's a lot of kids in those communities that could excel given the path and the opportunity. And I know that.
So you are creating a path for many others.
Yeah. So, I think in frankly, I'll be blunt about it. It was during 2020 when there was this sort of big sort of upheaval about people reckoning and starting to discover a lot of the societal impacts of race in the nation. I had this conversation with my friends about, sort of my path in, and just how fortunate I was to be able to meet people early on in high school that pushed me into this direction and gave me opportunity that I hadn't really personally done everything I could because I was so focused on my career. To be able to use the resources I have to offer paths and opportunities. And that's when the Roots Fund came about. And I partnered with my good friend Akimi Dubose, who's our executive director now, to really look at, okay, what would something like that look like? It's for me, it's not about handouts. I've never been a fan of that, and I don't think I ever got a handout. It's about guidance, helping to open some doors, destroy some glass ceilings, and give guidance and reassurance for those who are looking to enter the wine industry that are from demographics that weren't often considered as part of the industry. And how do we do that? But in a way that builds this whole groundswell of people who are driven and ambitious and hardworking and are looking to achieve. That was really what we're attempting to do, and it's been highly successful, and more personally fulfilling than I thought it ever would be. Just to see, people's lives change, and people who were looking for that opportunity and guidance.
And is this for people of all different colors and backgrounds?
Yeah, everything. It's we use the term communities of color because that is very vague, and intentionally that because we have to also look at our surroundings here. We look at the Napa Valley, and I would say that it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to say that 100% of the farmers here and the field workers are from the Hispanic Latinx community, and mainly Mexican. And how are we serving those communities to invest in them for those who say, I'm very fortunate. I've got this career here in farming, but I'd like to be a winemaker. I want to go into wine marketing. I'd like to own my own wine shop. Who's having these conversations with this next generation and giving them those paths and guidance? We're a half hour away from Vallejo with a very large African American community, and who's going, hey, look, You're in this bubble of Vallejo, but 20 minutes north is one of the most thriving wine regions in the world. And what can we do to bring you in and experience it to see if this is a career path that you're interested in? So, we try to connect with those, and we even have programs now in high school where we're going and talking to high school students about the wine industry as a career path, just so they even know,
Sure.
that it's an option, and it's been fantastic. And I think what you've seen is the industry just really embrace it. We're doing an event here in November, for the farm workers and all the vintners together, and you're bringing these demographics together to celebrate them, and the support has been absolutely amazing. Not just in the U.S. Some of our biggest contributors are in France and Burgundy and Champagne and so forth, and they just love the work because it's offering real results in a very short amount of time.
That's quite remarkable, Carlton. Um, I'm really pleased and surprised at the extension of the influence that you are pushing out there. It's not just for, winemakers, but also the ancillary services, which people tend to forget that if the grapes don't get picked, you don't get wine.
I mean, it's the amount of career paths in the wine industry
Sure.
are
There's
innumerable.
so many.
And even us, when we look at our company and we look at how to optimize things, we actually take an entire winery, we separate them into different industries, right?
Of
So we
course.
take, our land ownership and our farming, and that's one whole aspect. We go, how are we doing our best there? Winemaking itself, obviously, that has to be at the very highest level we can execute for that year. But then the sales and the marketing, you've got direct sales, you've got wholesale sales, you've got there's the accounting and finance part of it, there's the legal part of it. I mean, there's so many aspects.
Let me take you from, the different departments to the different continents. Going
Sure.
back to your CNN Nomad travel series, when you were in all these different places, on a personal level, and when you were eating at these different venues and the food and the style, how important do you feel that etiquette and manners, what relevance and the level of importance it has, Carlton,
I
in an individual's life?
Yeah, I feel that it's um, it's one of the easiest ways to show respect for other people is to try to observe or even study before you arrive, um, their etiquette and what's unique to them. And when you make those attempts, people want you've sent a message that you care about the way they live in the world and that you value it, enough to try to live within that tradition. But even if you fumble a little bit, they really appreciate a really
Very
strong
true.
effort. They really do. And I feel sometimes that it's lost on a younger generation that just feels that they should just define how they want to live in a space all the time without consideration for how that demographic already exists there. Again, the perfect example is going to Ghana. I'm particularly weird about eating with my hands a lot of times. I just am. I don't know why it's a weird thing. My girlfriend makes fun of me, but
No, because you're not used to it. I mean,
I'm not used
that's,
to it.
you
Yeah,
weren't brought
yeah.
up that way. Yes.
And there's also culture. There's certain foods that are acceptable in every country to eat with
Of
your hands, and ones that aren't, right? And you learn that. But in Ghana, they eat with their hands mostly, and
yes.
that was very, very difficult for me because in the U.S., that would, in some Western nations, they would look down upon is not being polite and being a bit crude. But there, it's actually you walk into a restaurant where people, businessmen in suit and ties, and the politicians in the top echelon of society that are dressed in full Laura piano, it just
Of
eating with
course.
their hands.
Finely dressed and eating. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is just that's their culture. That's how they interact. And but me picking up a fork and trying to eat would actually be rude.
Yes.
So it's about going into space,
Yeah.
in a selfless manner.
And
And
that's something that I always like to impress, always situation and environment.
yeah, always. And it's an easy way to show respect for people, and it's so important. It's a very selfless, humble sort of approach to things, and it shows people that you respect their culture. Even in today's in restaurants, even in Western, now you're in Western, culture, you're seeing, I'd say, sort of this degradation of that, of respect for that, of how we interact in those sort of rules as something that's like a bad thing. And I don't think it is. I think it's a beautiful way to show respect for your guests and other people at the table, and for the chef sometimes as well, and for
Certainly.
yeah.
Whenever I have an event, I always bring the chef and the team out to be
Yeah.
introduced to the guest. I think that is the minimal for the amount of work that they have put in. I believe that different generations have different perspectives of what etiquette should be. There is a sense of a lost art, a lost touch, and it's my sincere hope that both through what you're doing and what we're doing, we can put that equilibrium back together once again. Now, talking about that, different generations, what advice would you give for the next generation in terms of ingredients so that they might be able to achieve a life similar or even better than yours? If you were to give them 3 components.
You mean as far as career path
Yeah, no, well, more like, doesn't matter what career path they're going to have. I mean, what 3 vital components do you think it's important to achieve success?
For sure. One I'd say is nothing great was ever built without very hard work. And I've struggled over the last 3 to 4 years with hearing young people look at work as this sort of negative thing of we have to figure out how to just work a whole lot less, and where there is no recognition for the understanding of how economics and industries work, and that it's not a light switch, and that
So let me
that
be the devil's advocate here,
yeah.
Carlton. But
Hmm.
I like to have work balance. That's the trendy word.
Yeah, and I'll say my response to that is because it's something I work on as well. Is there is no permanent state, just like there's no. You say I want to be a happy person, right? There's no permanent state of bliss. It
Sure.
doesn't exist. I mean, even the Buddhists. I study Buddhism, and it guides a lot of my ability to be in the moment. Is there is no permanent state of bliss, just
Mhm.
like there's no permanent state of balance. And what I think is important to recognize is that what are those pockets where you can have it and actually enjoy it, and then recognize that there are parts of the year or maybe whole sections of your life, especially when you're young, where you're not going to have that balance. And everything is a reflection of input, right? You get out what you put in. So
Sure.
what is your ultimate goal? There are many people, and it's absolutely their right, and I support this, where they go, look, I don't have aspirations to be up here. I want this life, and I want to do this, and that's okay. But recognize that comes with not being able to do this, right? I
Of
mean,
course.
if your goal is to be top of an industry, you've got to work harder and smarter than everybody else. That's just, to me, it's just basic. Now that hard work can be defined in a number of ways. It can be
So
entrepreneur.
hard work is one. What are the other
Yeah,
2?
yeah. I'd say a general curiosity and open-mindedness
Okay.
is incredibly important, because that one, it gives you the opportunity to see opportunity where other people don't see it.
Mhm.
Because if you're just laser focused like this and you go, this is the way things are done, and you're going to lose an enormous amount of opportunity that could take your life and take it to another trajectory. Open-mindedness, and general curiosity, uh,
Okay. So
incredibly important.
curiosity, hard work, and
Mhm.
open-mindedness.
Mhm.
I think that's a very potent
Yeah,
uh,
and, and
troika.
and I'd say, to add on to the hard work thing, is people think of hard work as something where you just put your head down and grind. I think that, I had this conversation with my niece. I flew back last night. It was her high school graduation, and I said to her, I says, a passionate person can find passion in almost anything they're doing.
Sure.
You have to be the type of person who is committed to the work, right? There's the factory worker who comes in and works hard every day and just does the thing, goes home. But there's the other person who is passionate about the work, takes general interest in the team they're working with, and takes a greater deeper look into even what they're doing. There's, be a passion driven person, because the hard work part is just part of that, and you'll have greater success if you lead with passion and conviction. It's the work is more fulfilling. It gives it more purpose than just the functionality of the work you do every day. I work very, very hard every day. I take very few days off, and from the outside, you go, this guy's crazy. He's gonna fall apart. But the work is very mission driven, so it has
But it's
purpose.
also your passion. So
I mean, it's and you can find that in different things, and it's important to have that. You'll be a happier person in the hard work, right?
So talking about life, Carlton, what wine would you serve at your funeral?
So it's I'd say at my age, it's not something you think about very often, but I would say it's as I'm not a big fan of the current structure of funerals with mourning and so forth. I think I would love to have strictly champagne, but only in large format, so a minimum of a Jeroboam, which would ensure my guests had a fantastic time. They drank well, but it was celebratory. It's not people sitting around with decanters and sniffing, and no, just a great Gatsby style party with
Okay.
with fantastic food and just large formats of champagne exclusively. Yeah.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
And finally, Carlton, quotations. You seem to be a man of letters and reading. Which one would you share with us that you would have found deeply inspirational, that you always sort of go back to? Anything from your grandmother, your late grandmother?
I mean, we have tons of sayings, but from my grandmother.
Share one that really resonates with you all the time.
Well, and they were less, these days we have these philosophers, and I read a lot. Like, I love Alan Watts. I think he's a really brilliant guy, as far as philosophers are concerned and so forth. But it was less of those sort of like really punchy one-liners, where it was just more about, advice and so forth. And my grandmother was an incredibly hardworking person. I never knew a time when she didn't have two jobs, and she always helped raise kids and grandkids and things like this. And it was just pretty much, it was a concept of her philosophy was no days off. She didn't believe in them. And what she meant by that was, if I'm not working, I'm with my family. I mean, like, she didn't see this desire to just sort of spend time just sitting down, being by herself. For her, it wasn't living. For
No,
her,
she was always working.
Yeah, there was no days off. It was either I was working to support my family, or I was cooking with my family. There was always something that was sort of driving her, where she could contribute. And what it ultimately came down was, she lived her entire life in the service of others. She worked very hard, but she also oversaw a church. She was a pastor, a mentor, and counselor to numerous people. She raised her own kids, but a lot of her grandkids, and she just lived this really high-spirited, very passion-driven life that was always in the service of being around and taking care of other people.
So is there a particular quote that rings in your head all the time?
Not necessarily. It's the advice. My grandmother was a very quiet person. She was very meek. She lived her entire life by example. She didn't go around. She was quiet. She lived in the kitchen.
Okay.
She always took care of people. And it's
How would you describe her in 3 words then?
my grandmother was incredibly wise, incredibly hardworking, and purely selfless.
So selfless, hardworking, and kind.
Yeah,
I think those 3 words have certainly encapsulated themselves deep inside you, and your success is roaring ahead, Carlton. And certainly you are emulating what your late grandmother so carefully instilled within you. And it's been a real pleasure having you on the Apoisi Wine Buzz. And I certainly hope when I come to Napa next time,
yes,
I have a chance to come around and have a look at all your estates. And
you have to let us host you. I mean,
I will consider that the highlight of my visit.
Fantastic.
Do take care, be safe, and until we meet, for those viewers, I think when you're going to Napa Valley, where to go. Thanks very much, Carlton.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. I appreciate your time.
Please comment, like, share, or subscribe to our videos.